You have just entered The Royal Access, a show for believers who are ready to walk boldly in their faith by choosing Christ over culture. Journey with us each week as I connect with guests who share that their success is found in having Jesus as their source. Welcome to another episode of The Royal Access. It's your girl, Corel, and I just want to give a big shout out to Jiggy Studios. Thank you. We love kicking it with Jiggy Studios every week, so thank you so much. And I didn't dare to do this with my guest last week, but I wanted to remember to do it today. So every time I interview someone, I like to ask them if they remember the first time we met.
Wow. No, you did not.
And he didn't even know that question was coming.
I did not know that question was coming.
I remember if you don't, so I'm going to give you a chance. I do, so I'm going to give you a chance.
Now, that's even worse. It's like, I remember clearly.
I
remember. I actually don't.
It's drawing a blank. So the reason why I remember it is because we're in this interview format, and that's how come it's coming to me of why I remember. So I was being interviewed on a radio show, and you were on the radio show at the same time.
Oh.
And I was like, who is this? And I was moving. Yeah. It was the first time I lived in Nassau. I lived in Nassau from 2014 to 2016 the first time.
Right.
And I had just come out with my book in February of that year. So that was February 2016. My book had just come out. And someone, I don't know how I got connected with that radio station, but someone connected me with someone there. But you were also being interviewed on the radio around the same time.
Wow.
The same day. We had, I think they shared our segment. Not sure why, but they shared the segment. And it was just, you were just so very powerful. You were very and usually I don't do that in terms of reaching out to someone after meeting them on one encounter and asking them to mentor me. Because I know how people feel. They're like, I don't know time to mentor nobody. I don't even know you. Why you want me? But it's just your personality was so captivating. I was like, I have to know her more. I have to know more.
And around the moves, right? God reconnects us around the moves.
He does.
Awesome?
He does.
That's
so
amazing.
I was like, I have to know more. So I want you to tell us a little bit about yourself and a little bit about you coming to Christ. For me, I grew up in the faith, and I would say I got serious about Christ probably 10 years ago. But what was that experience like for you when it comes to your relationship with Christ?
So I grew up in a Hispanic household. I'm Dominican originally. Child of immigrants in the U.S. I grew up Catholic, Roman Catholic, all my life. Strong Catholic family. Like, we have priests, we have nuns. All of
like
them.
Catholic.
Like Catholic. No, I mean like Catholic. You got to add a third one there. That's how much. I was an altar girl. I sang in the choir. All of it. Head altar girl. Always in leadership. It is what it is. I taught catechism, didn't know what I was teaching, but I was like 10 years old teaching catechism in the Catholic Church. And at some point, was in the youth group, all of that. A leader in the youth group. I was the church secretary when I turned 16. All through it, though, I had encounters with God. So let me give you an example. I wanted a job. I know my father was like, absolutely not. But I knew that if a certain situation happened, then maybe he would. So I asked God, I don't want to apply for a job. I want you to have somebody call me about a job. And the priest called me. So the priest called and said, we need a secretary part-time. And the first person I thought about was you. So I knew my dad would be like, yes, absolutely. It's at church. It's with the priest. You're good. So that was my first job, was at the Catholic Church as a part-time secretary.
Wow. You were in there.
In there. When I turned 18, I kind of just said, this religion is too much. It's too much religion. I want to do my own thing without the pressure of conviction or confession, which, I went through the routines of religion quite a bit. I say the Catholic Church taught me religion, but it didn't teach me God. And so it's like, I went into the religion is the opium of society. I'm out.
Peace. At 18, you were like?
18, out completely. Resigned from my job, left the church altogether.
Like you weren't in church at all?
No.
And that's why when you said you grew up Catholic, that's why I was like, I am waiting to hear the rest of this story. Because most of my friends who grew up Catholic, they're not believers.
Yeah.
Like they have a respect, like, yeah, but I feel like there is some like God or something. But
Something
to say
out there.
have a relationship, no.
Yeah, no.
So that's why I was shocked, but it's good not good, but I mean, it makes sense. It makes sense to hear this part happen in your journey because I'm like, how did she skip that? I really want to know. So at 18, okay.
And I wasn't nominally Catholic. My family is to this day, like, you know, I got a call. They didn't call me when I left the church, when I stopped going to church. They called me when they found out I was going to a non-denominational church, or I became a born-again Christian.
Right.
Then it was like, why did you leave the mother church? God left me in the wilderness for about 2 years. Not very long. I didn't get to party long and all of that. You know, Roman Catholicism lends itself to that anyway. So I partied in my teenage years while I was a Catholic. It's not like born again experience or anything like that. We did all of it. Got drunk, all of it. Sex, all of it. Go to church, lied to the priest kind of thing. I did the confession though, but I'd lie to the priest. Oh yes, because he was old. I felt like he couldn't take it. Then it was just literally, it was an awareness. My life was good. I had what I wanted. I had a great job. Worked at a hospital with great benefits. Great job for my age. I had a pretty good sense of where I was headed in life. I was gonna go back to school, but I was gonna go to become a nurse and then eventually continue my education to become a doctor. That was my mind. That was my path. Yes. And so I had it, you know, I was at a teaching hospital, which meant I could keep my job and they will pay for my education. So it was set. It was good. I was living. I was doing it. I had a brand new car. I'm like, it's all good. And then there was just this awareness. There's something bigger. There's something more. My life has a significance that I haven't tapped into yet, a meaning, a sense of meaning. And I can't do that without God. And that's all I knew. Can't do it without God. And it kept coming up. I can't do it without him. I need him. And so I had a moment. It was by myself in my apartment, got on my knees. I told him, I don't know how to pray. Hail Mary doesn't fit this moment. But he had set me up. And the way he set me up, when I was in the youth group, Catholic youth group, I loved this tape, Brooklyn Tabernacle Choir. And I used to play it so much when one of my co-leaders used to pick me up. This is before I had a car and all of that. I used to play it so much, she gave it to me as a gift for Christmas. So I would spend hours singing songs I didn't know anything about. Like, there's been a great change in me. God, I'm so happy. I'm so free. He brought me out of darkness into this marvelous night. I didn't know. But there was one song specifically that captured me. It was Lead Me, Lord, and I Will Follow. Lead me, Lord, and I will go. You have called me, and I will answer. Lead me, Lord, and I will go. So I told him, I don't know how to pray, but I'll sing. And I sang him that song. And then I asked him one thing. I said, the only thing I'm asking you is don't send me back to the Catholic Church.
I don't want to go down.
No.
Like anything else.
Then my phone rings, and it's my friend's little brother. And he says, I'm not asking you, I'm telling you, you're coming to church with me tomorrow.
Literally, you sing the song, and then you get a call.
Yeah. Yeah. And that began the journey.
Wow. And so and then after that, so you got the call, you went to church with him, then you went into seminary.
I started there at that church. It was an AME Zion church. My call came, it's just as drastic, you know. I was having encounters with God in my bedroom, a lot of encounters. If I were to tell you all the encounters, I mean, I learned deliverance because God told me, break these generational curses. I didn't have any theology for it. So the way I was experiencing God, he will do something, then he sent me to the Bible. to study it. And I would study it because these things weren't happening at an AME Zion church.
Right.
So I was having a different experience personally than I was having at my church. And at some point, he started with, I need you to study the Bible, to teach it, to preach it. I've called you to preach. And so I had this book. I would write down sermons and that I would never preach, just study it, study the subject, write out the sermons, and I had it in a book. Then he sent me to tell my pastor that I felt the call to preach. He took me on for about 6 months. We did classes with him, went through the initial training, which I would later do in Bible college, hermeneutics, all of that. And then I preached my trial sermon. That's the AME Zion Church. You have to preach a sermon and then they vote. Whether or not you're called.
Really?
Yes, it's called the trial sermon. So they set it up like a service. You go through all of the service stuff and you're the preacher. And then after you're done preaching, the pastor comes up and tells the congregations, they do the whole rules of meeting kind of thing. Does anybody vote that she is called to preach? Once you have experienced her ministry now, do you believe she's called? Yes. Someone voted yes. Somebody seconded the vote. And then we rejoiced that I'm called to preach.
That you were called to preach. And in speaking of being called to preach, and I know you've gotten it a lot because you're a woman who's been called to preach.
Yeah.
What is usually your response to those who feel that women aren't called to preach?
Well, I have the theological response for sure. You can look at the scripture and see that when you translate scripture, which they use some of Paul's writings to Timothy, you got to go into the context. And to me, Paul is a hypocrite if in one sense he's saying silence means that they're not called to lead. And then on the other hand, he's commending Aquila for being a co-laborer with him in the gospel. And you study that time, you know that a married couple, usually they would mention the man first. It's clear that Aquila had a more prominent role as a leader. Her and her husband trained Apollos as an apostle. So
Aquila and Priscilla,
right?
They were with Paul.
They keep mentioning her first,
right?
So he fellow prisoners, fellow co-laborers. So he had a high esteem for women in ministry. I think we just misconstrue the context. In the context of Timothy, men and women at the time culturally were not allowed to study in the same space. So women will sit in one space, men in the other space. Women are now allowed to learn, which culturally they weren't before. So what does the woman who's married to someone who's on the other side do when the teaching is going on and they have a question? They will yell across to ask questions of their husbands. And he's saying, in the church, remain silent. When you get home, you can ask your husband. So it was about order in the assembly, not necessarily order in the calling.
That's beautiful. I've never heard it broken down that way.
Yeah.
And as you mentioned too, with women, if you weren't allowed to learn, then yes, you at that point, you wouldn't have been able to teach nothing because you weren't able to learn. So if you had questions about what you were learning, just, have that conversation with your husband, because women weren't allowed to do a lot of things.
They weren't. Which goes back to even how Jesus treated women. And you should look at how Jesus treated women. He was very intentional. The first time Jesus revealed himself as Messiah was to a woman at a well. Okay. The greatest revelation, the Jewish people had prayed for him, believed, prophesied about his coming. But the judgment on the Jewish community was, you did not discern the day of your visitation, right? When Messiah was there, you didn't discern that he was there. When he revealed himself, you would think if men were to carry the news, or the only ones to preach the good news, what good would it be for Messiah to reveal himself first to a woman, second to a Samaritan woman?
Why are we doing that? Why we need to do that if she don't need to go there? And
so that's just one instance. The greatest revelation handed over to a woman first. The second part would be when Mary and Martha, that story where Martha's in the kitchen, where women belong, culturally. Okay, the woman is in the kitchen. Martha is up in arms over the fact that Mary is sitting at the feet of Jesus. We read that from the Western perspective, and we don't understand the cultural connotations of a woman sitting at the foot of a rabbi means that she's taking the posture of a disciple. When rabbis discipled, they did not disciple to make you a good moral person. They discipled so that they could multiply themselves in you. So if you were a disciple, that means you were next, right? So Jesus could have easily, in that moment when Martha comes out of the kitchen in a fuss, Mary is sitting over there.
She needs to be doing, working, and doing what the women is doing.
She needs to be in the kitchen because that's where women's supposed to be. And Jesus said, no, Mary has chosen the one thing. She's chosen the right thing. She's sitting at my feet. That means he was commending her posture as a disciple.
Those are mind blowing. I think it's mind blowing, and it takes me to one of the reasons why I wanted to have this conversation with you in terms of how you have decided to choose Christ over culture, and I think I could say also Christ over comfort.
Oh, Jesus. You know what? It started, I had just had this conversation with two of my pastors. I have no other option because he raised me in that way. Like, back to the scene at the AME Zion Church, we had, most of the congregation were very supportive. My pastor was very supportive. I was so scared to preach. Like the woman you see here, I'm shy. I'm usually quiet. What? I come into new environments. I'm a slightly introvert, not all the way.
I'm not the priest. Do not lie. Do not lie.
I promise you, I was not comfortable in front of people. So now God is calling me to preach. When I tell you that the worst decision I made on that day was to wear a skirt suit and not a pantsuit, because my thighs were knocking, Corel. I'm talking about, and I was skinny. I was about 100 pounds lighter than I am right now. But this is what was happening. I was shaking like a leaf. And I said to the Lord quietly, if you call me to do this, you're going to have to do something before it's time for me to preach. And when we in the Methodist order of service, there's a pastoral prayer that happens right before the preaching. And I knelt down, and I promise you, Jesus stood next to me. Like I could feel him. I could feel a person next to me. And I felt when the oil was poured on my head, and it was like warmth went through my body. All of the fear, all of the nervousness, everything left me. I got up and I preached for 40 minutes. And I always say, and I've been long-winded ever since. But
I was going to say, I go to your church. You don't preach 40 minutes no more.
No more. My pastor said, the one thing I have against you in all of this, he said, is you're supposed to preach for 20, not 40.
So right. The
40 was already long, buddy. But, in that same moment, people were greeting and commending and saying, you came out. You preach like you've been preaching all your life, all of that. I'm hearing all of the affirmation. Out of the side of my eye, I see this person, this is one of the deacons, and I can see it in his face that he's on a mission, and it's not good. And he came down the aisle determined with evil in his eye, like literally. Like I'm looking at him like, what is happening? He comes in front of me and he points his finger at me and he says, I just want you to know that you are not called to preach. I don't think you're called to preach. And I said, sir, take it up with God. And that's been my posture ever since.
Take it up with God.
Take it up with God.
Oh my God.
Take it up with God, because at the end, I just want to hear, well done.
Yeah. And that's what I've been saying in this series. The reality is, sometimes people see the stage and they see the platform, but they don't see what goes on with you behind closed doors. Yeah. They don't see the people who tell you you're not called to preach. They don't see the people who question what, where you are and what you're doing. Yeah. And so, as I said, you've had to choose Christ over comfortable, Christ over culture, because culturally some people feel like women aren't called to preach, that women aren't called to lead as a lead pastor, and you now serve as the lead pastor of Legacy. And I know for you that must have been a hard journey. I think once we reconnected, when I got home, one of the questions I asked once we caught up was, did you ever feel like, okay, at this point in my life, I don't want to pursue leading a church by myself in the Bahamas. I'm not from here. Yeah. Now I'll have to do it by myself. Mm-hmm. Now there's a split, like with all of that. There's controversy. Lies. Yeah, right? Lies. Because as we know, you were married to a Bahamian. You guys had a church. There was a split. Yeah. And then you had to move into what I'm going to do next. And I think comfortably and culturally would be, well, let me just go back home. Right. So how did you walk through that decision of the more comfortable or path that most people think would be take is just like, okay, there's a split, I'm going to go back home, to I'm going to remain, I'm going to lead, and I'm going to do it with grace.
Well, let me pull it back.
Yeah, go ahead.
Because even the decision to step away from the marriage, right, was culturally not the norm. And when I say cultural, I don't just mean Bahamian. I'm talking about in the church culture.
Church culture.
Right? The easier thing would have been to safeguard the facade. Regardless of what's happening at home, just present
a united front.
Right. And that would have been an easier thing, I think I would have gotten a lot of support with, I'm sticking by him, and the devil.
That's your man.
The devil's attacking, all of that. I had to make a decision based on my values and what I would stand with. And that came early. God asked me the hardest thing, and I don't want to paint a bad picture of God, because my view of Christianity, my theology of my faith, may have started already different, because it started with me and him. It didn't start with culture. It didn't start with church. It didn't start with listening to a message and responding to somebody's view of him. It started with a raw reality that God is, and I need him. And that is wonderful, glorious, powerful, but frightening at the same time, because we're going to run into the fact that he is, regardless of whether we believe in him, have a relationship with him or not. He is. He's the author. He's the finisher. He started this thing. He's going to end it. And what we decide in the midst of that is going to have huge consequences, right? And because he is, when I accepted him with the reality that I needed reconnection with him, and that reconnection I couldn't work for. Jesus did that work, right? Grace through faith. That's the gospel. Yeah. I couldn't earn it. I could just have faith in it and receive it. But once I do, I got a different instruction, which is deny yourself, pick up the cross, and follow me. And that has been the journey from the beginning. I want to go to Bible college. Okay, fine, I'll do it in Pennsylvania, and I will still do med school. No, go to Florida. What? Deny yourself, pick up the cross, follow. And now, okay, I meet this man. Let's stay in the States. We were going to a church. We were going to be second in command at a church, and like all hell breaks loose. And he says, Bahamas, deny yourself, pick up the cross and follow. And, now we're having this situation where I'm called into a meeting after I call the church into a meeting and explain what is happening, because I want to lead with transparency. I don't want to be, I always feel like we got to do church and life together, not just church together. Right? Okay, this is what's happening. Want everybody that is under our leadership to know what's happening, want transparency, all of that. And I get called into a meeting. Pastor, with a quaking voice, I think you need to know the truth. I thought I just told the truth. What's the truth? And I get called into this meeting, and while this young man is telling me the things that are happening that I did not know about, which violates my values as a leader, because I feel like when you are leading God's people, you're human, you have human desires, all of that stuff. But as a shepherd, there's a way that you handle sheep. Right. So as I'm sitting there listening to this young man tell me all of the horrors that are going on that I don't know about, I hear the whisper of the Holy Spirit say, this is not a moment for the woman, for the mother or the wife. I need the leader. So deny yourself. Take up the cross and follow. And now you can choose the comfort of the facade of a relationship, or a front of a joined, marriage when it's not there. Or you can choose to defend and fight for victims. So I gotta let your whole everything crumble so that you can stand as a leader, right? That was like the hardest thing, I think, that God, you're asking me. But from the beginning, he said, when I can promise you, it's like the scripture comes up. If there's allegations against an elder, you need to have 2 or 3 witnesses. I'm woman, wife, leader, right? And I'm sitting there knowing I'm going to have conversations with people, because I can't even come, if I'm going to handle this biblically, I can't even come with what this young man says. I got to have witnesses, which means I'm going to have to be a leader in this moment, And so I asked him, do you know these to be true? You're my first witness. And then I had to have meetings and all of that. So it was hard, but I was clear at what he was requiring of me.
And you had to take the step, even though it was extremely difficult.
It's extremely difficult. And I think, again, it's like the support would have been if I would have turned away and acted like what was just revealed never happened. And I'm just going to be, the wife that stands with, and no, I couldn't do it.
You couldn't. You had to. And that's what's hard when, like you said, the culture is known for doing something this way. And so in order to keep what culture says to do, sometimes we make decisions of, well, this is what I should do, or this is what everyone is saying I should do, versus what is the Holy Spirit saying I should do in this moment. And sometimes those moments are extremely hard.
We do that to women. Can we hit that? We do that to women so often that, a few of the things that were thrown at me is, you're not a woman of covenant, or, God hates divorce. And I'm like, yeah, but God hates abuse as well. And we can't keep telling women that they have to uphold a covenant that has been broken. Right? Go back, pray and stay while you're being, and that wasn't the case for me. It wasn't like there was domestic violence or anything like that. But we do send it. We do send a lot of women back into dangerous environments on the, this is what you're supposed to do. And it's a misrepresentation of God even in that.
So when you were speaking, it reminded me of the story with Saul and David, of how, Saul was anointed But Saul, didn't uphold what God was calling him to do. And so he told Samuel, stop crying over Saul. I now send you chosen another one. Go and anoint him. And it isn't the same for everyone. I was saying last week in the podcast last week that, that we have to realize when the Holy Spirit is talking to us, because sometimes we choose what someone else has done, or we choose culture, or we choose something else. And so the last thing that I wanted us to touch on was, what was that moment like when not only did he ask you to walk away, which was a hard decision, but to stay and lead?
Okay, so oh God,
stay and lead.
I want to leave.
I'm not gonna lie. We went out that day, I'm like, how'd you get the strength to stay? Because I love that you're here because I get to connect with you, but in my mind, I would have felt
peace
deuces,
out.
Bahamas.
Deuces. I had options. I mean, again, I'm a planner, I'm a thinker. Do I put someone in place and let these people continue on? Do I just dissolve it? I had a whole conversation already, like a script. Find a leader you can trust and a community you can belong to. Whatever you do,
you know it by heart.
Whatever you do, don't leave the church. Don't worry, don't let this failure, take you out of the fold and all of that. But in my heart, I knew that he was saying stay. He was saying it. I had to hear it many times, though, honestly. I brought down a prophet that I trust, a father in the faith, and I wanted him to see and to look, and I told him everything. And when he came, he said, lady, you can't leave these people. I'm like, oh God, okay, he's not giving me what I want.
Leave.
But it was everywhere. Trusted voices. I put myself under, the words of many different leaders that I trust. And the word was, I couldn't deny it. It was, you have to stay. You still have a work to do. You are a sent one. God specifically sent you to the nation of the Bahamas with a mandate to dismantle the spirit of religion. You have to remain, and you have to raise up a people. And that was consistent. There was such a consistency in that messaging that I couldn't deny it. And so wasn't easy, but one of the things that in one of prophetic words that God actually sent me back to it a few days ago, and the prophet was talking about just the people that wouldn't believe that I can carry the mandate, given the specifics of the situation, that they will indeed see that I'm called of the Lord. And I don't do it for people, but it was very clear that he said, what you're about to do in this moment, you're going to do in the strength of God. And so I am in the midst of writing a book called, I might change the name, but anyway, the premise of the book is about strength and weakness. It's about the fact that I had to make myself rely on, depend on, and lean on God in ways that I never had before in order to make it through that season. And I knew his strength in my weakness, in my ability to be vulnerable, in my ability to yield and feel my emotions so that I can heal. Not in that strong woman complex, that we do. Like, you got to be the strong one. Yeah. And that means I muster it up and I take it and I run with it. Not in that. So even when people they would say to me a lot of times, and I heard this often, you're like a woman of steel. And I will say, nah, I'm not. I'm weak. And that's the strength that you see.
Yeah, because you're relying on God. You said so much just now. So there are a few things that you said. You said you felt like God told that he sent you to dismantle religion. That makes me think about how you told me you grew up Catholic.
Yeah.
And how everyone I know who grew up Catholic, they were so turned off by the religion of Catholic that they don't have a relationship with God. But that's why God would use someone who went through that journey to be assigned to dismantle religion. Yeah. And another thing that you said that stood out to me was how you said that in your weakness, God shows his strength. And that's why we have situations where he uses someone he knows he can trust, that will listen to his voice, and do what he's called them to do when they have to choose Christ over culture or Christ over comfort, because he knows, because I think people on the outside think that's hard. Why would you do that? I'm not doing it. God is doing it. Like, I too know it's hard. I too know it looks crazy. I too know that this is not easy.
They judged me for it, you know. They said, I sat with an apostle and I was able to share with him like just the events, right, that went down. And he felt that because I wasn't yelling and screaming and crying and whatever, I was too strong in the moment for that kind of situation.
It's Jesus. It's not me. Me would have been crazy.
Me would have been, I smashed the windows at your car. That's me.
That's what I would have done. This is the Lord. This is the Lord right now.
Right, that's me. If you didn't see that of craziness, I was told, do it, you know.
Yeah. You could do it.
You were holding
and even in that, you were choosing Christ over culture, because I could smash the windows. I could do whatever.
Yes.
But, you know, you continue to choose what God wanted you to do. So I think that's a message for people when they're like, I don't want to do what God is telling me to do because it's too hard. But that's the point, because you're not doing it in your strength. Yeah. If you could have done it in your strength, then he wouldn't have asked you to do it. Or if you would have been the kind of person that would have relied on your strength, he'd have never asked you. He knew he could trust you to lead. He knew he could trust you with the critiques, with the attacks, with everything that you were going through, because you were going to lean it into him and not try to take it over and do it yourself, because you can't.
I had to, because even answering, like just the distraction of answering the critics or answering the lies, the narrative, you know, because they were loud. They weren't quiet. They were loud. And they got back to me, a lot of it, you know, but making sure that I remain focused on what God said and stay focused on the process of my healing that's happening simultaneously with healing, allowing him to heal me, my daughter. I have a community of wounded people at this moment. And you have the critics, and you have the attacks, and you have the witchcraft, and you have so much just pressure from the outside that all of it can make you collapse. I had to lean on him. Yeah. I had to trust that this was him. I had to trust that there will be another side of this. And we've seen it. We've seen him be so gracious, so powerful, so amazing. Tomorrow's sermon is going to dive right into this, because I'm going after that altar to our feelings that we've created in our culture. Especially the young adults are not going to like me tomorrow, because I'm coming for the altar of feelings and emotions, and God has to tell me exactly what's going to happen for me to follow and obey.
Awesome. Yeah, we don't like to do that, so we don't. And there's so much more of your story that we can unpack, but I want to say thanks for sharing with us what it means to choose God when we don't want to choose him, when it's hard, and how to leaning into him for strength. And I think what I also noticed is that you did also have people above you. I think when people are called into leadership, they forget that I still need to have someone who's pouring into me. I still need to someone who's going to be overseeing me, because we're human and we're not perfect. Yeah. And so as a leader, if I'm going to lead others, I need someone else that I'm going to lean on to that can help to guide me through a path when the human side of us wants to come out.
Listen, you can't be a God unto yourself. And that's where people are missing it, that say we don't need church, or we don't need to be a part of community and all of that. You can't be a God unto yourself. No. We all have blind sides.
Yes.
We all have spaces that need correction and that need swift rebuke. And, you know, you need people that are going to say, I know what you're feeling. I know what you want to do, but obedience for you in this moment looks like this.
Yeah, and this is what you need to do.
Yeah, and then you take that hard pill. He taught me the cold shower of leadership during that season. I didn't know about the benefits of cold showers. I learned it in that season.
He showed you, and that's you should just go through this process right there.
It's a divine reset.
Divine reset. But you always have brought me a wealth of knowledge. That's why I've always seen you as a mentor. I appreciate over the years where we go to our breakfasts and have our time, and then having the time now to go to Legacy. But if there's anyone who wants to continue to stay connected to you, can you look right in there? Let us know. How can they stay connected? What are ways they can stay in touch with you?
Yeah, so Legacy Church, for sure. We're on all social platforms. Or myself. Now I have to spell my name because y'all say it in English, but I'm still Dominicana. So it's Rosemary, Rosemary. Mery. And I went back to my maiden name, so Peña.
Peña. Rosemary Peña.
Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, all of it.
Oh, you on TikTok too?
I'm on TikTok. Yeah. I need to post more, but the highways and the byways are in the internet.
They're in the internet, and you can find them. Well, thanks so much, and thank you guys for tuning in. We can't wait to see you guys next week.